Wales is a country with beautiful scenery, vibrant towns and cities, a history of conflict, and unique natural resources. It is also home to many ghosts that lurk in its valleys and mines, haunt its castles and coasts, and make appearances in the most unusual of places. From poltergeists to a man dressed in gold, from a convicted murderer to a workhouse inmate, we'll delve into some of the stories from this fascinating and ancient land. Welcome to the Ghosts of Wales. Croeso I Gymru. Aberconwy House is located in the walled market town of Conwy in North Wales, a town that's renowned for its ghosts. The spectre of a drowned fisherman has been seen on the quayside, and a ghostly sentry has been observed pacing along the looming walls of the nearby castle. This medieval merchant's house is one of the oldest datable houses in Wales. Tree ring dating on its wooden beams reveal that the structure dates from around 1418. This extraordinary half-timbered and stone house has witnessed the town's violent and turbulent past. Unsurprisingly, it's reputedly haunted. The Jacobean rooms are said to be the most active and are home to an apparition nicknamed Mr. Jones. Staff and visitors to the property have witnessed him many times. Before he manifests, the distinct smell of pipe tobacco and fresh flowers permeates through the room, and then he begins to appear. Mr. Jones is a tall gentleman in dark Victorian clothes who walks with purpose across the floor. One custodian described the figure as looking very similar to the late television personality and engineer Fred Dibner. Sometimes he is seen downstairs in the property, but at the end of the day, he walks into a Jacobean room, a room with only one point of access, and then vanishes. One brave member of staff followed the apparition and witnessed him vanish into a wall. Some staff refused to enter this part of the building, as they've reported being poked by an unknown force. Between 1850 and 1880, William and Jane Jones lived at the house with their 10 children when the property was run as a temperance hotel. Mr. Jones died here in 1880, and his wife continued to operate the hotel until 1910. But Mr. Jones, it seems, is just one of the ghosts present at the house. A beautiful lady wearing an ornate red and black Jacobean dress occasionally appears next to a fireplace. She has a pale face and long dark hair, and she stands and looks at the visitors. People think she's a real person, a costume guide wearing an elaborate outfit, but when they ask her a question, she doesn't reply. In 2006, a guest from Liverpool named Andrea Olsen complained about the rudeness of one of the volunteers. The staff were puzzled. Nobody was due to be a costume guide that day, and there weren't any theatrical events planned. When they went back to check the room, she was gone. Another visitor overheard the complaint and said she too had witnessed the Jacobean woman. She reported, "She's been there since I've been in the building, but she doesn't mean any harm." But it seems not all the spirits are so harmless. Poltergeist activity occurs here. There have been sudden drops in temperature and icy drafts that can make people feel rather unwell, the sounds of heavy booted footsteps marching across the floor, and one of the custodians had a heavy door suddenly slammed shut directly in front of his face. Office equipment such as pens and staplers go missing, only to be discovered in a different unexpected location, including in the cellar. Items in the small shop are also moved in the night when the property is empty. Today the house is owned by the National Trust and is used as a second-hand bookshop. Will Mr. Jones find a suitable book to read, and will the poltergeist make its presence known to unsuspecting browsers? Only time will tell. Powis Castle is a medieval castle, fortress and grand country house near the market town of Welshpool, just a few miles from the Welsh border with England. The seat of Welsh nobles, the Herbert family, Earls of Powis, the castle is known for its formal gardens and for its interiors, which have been described as the most important and the most magnificent in the country. The castle is open to the public, but there are some very different visitors moving through its beautiful rooms. This striking red sandstone building dates back to the 13th century. It was built by a Welsh prince named Griffith to protect against another Welsh prince in Gwynedd in the north. The castle was besieged in the 14th and 15th centuries. During the Civil War, the castle was owned by William Herbert, the first Baron Powis, a politician and loyal supporter of King Charles I. In October 1644, the castle was attacked and captured by parliamentarians under Sir Thomas Middleton. Eventually, after the restoration of Charles II in 1660, the castle was returned to the family. The most famous ghost story connected with the castle goes back to 1780, but there have been some recent sightings within the property. In the early 2000s, members of staff began to witness a woman wearing a mob cap and a white apron. She appeared to an administrator and his son inside the on-site staff accommodation. She was witnessed again in 2006. On this occasion, she sat on the end of the bed of the building supervisor and his wife in their private flat. Nobody knows who she is. She has a pale face, appears as a real person, and is silent. She stares through people before slowly fading away. The most active area of the castle is the Duke's Room at the end of the long gallery. Visitors and members of staff have witnessed shadowy figures moving quickly through this area, as well as solid apparitions. Two visitors, at different times but both on the same day, inquired about a lady dressed in black who they'd seen sitting in a chair next to the fireplace. The chairs on display were not for public use, but this figure appeared defiant, stern and aloof. The house steward, whilst working in the Duke's Room, saw a tall, thin lady dressed in black standing next to the door of the Duke's Room. Later that day, another visitor witnessed the same figure in the same location, and another visitor was startled to feel an invisible hand reach out and grab her arm. In the evening, after the visitors have left, the castle descends into darkness and the nocturnal activity commences. The ballroom wing becomes active, perhaps a nod to its elegant past. The narrow 18th century room is adorned with a spectacular grand piano. Despite the ballroom being empty of people and locked, the haunting sound of piano music is heard by staff who live in the on-site accommodation nearby. One evening, the property manager and a conservator went to speak to the piano tuner, who they thought was busy at work. As they ascended the staircase, they both heard the piano being played, but as soon as they entered the ballroom, the music stopped. It was silent and nobody was present in the room. Another odd incident connected to the piano involved it being moved whilst restoration took place in the room. It was a serious task to move such a heavy item, but the following morning it had moved back to its original location. Staff were absolutely perplexed. It had taken several people to move the piano, and not one security alarm, all set and working, had been triggered that night. There have been times when male builders in particular, whilst carrying out work, have felt they are being watched. On one occasion, a builder descending a stone staircase felt hands grab both of his shoulders as though to bring him to an abrupt halt. He immediately sensed that he was in trouble and was about to be frog-marched to face the owners, but there was nobody behind him. Rumours circulate that this is the spirit of a groundkeeper's assistant. The castle's records show that the Powis Castle estate, perhaps begrudgingly, paid the solicitor's fee for this unnamed man who was accused of manslaughter after a pub brawl in 1872, an incident that could have brought the name of the castle into disrepute. Unsurprisingly, the man was acquitted. Other ghost stories linked to the castle include the sound of a large ghostly dog, panting, howling and scratching vigorously at the door of the old kitchen as though desperately trying to get out. Interestingly, assistance dogs often refuse to go near this area. Sometimes the locked doors of the ballroom rattle as though someone is trying to enter or leave when the room is empty. An unidentified man roams the ground floor rooms, and a man on horseback gallops across the impressive gardens. Over the centuries, a series of unfortunate events befell a number of owners of the castle. In 1848, the Earl of Powis was pheasant shooting on the castle's land when he was accidentally shot in the thigh by his companion as a pheasant rose. The bullet was removed, but the wound was fatal. George Herbert, the fourth Earl of Powis, was especially unlucky. In 1910, he was out hunting on his horse and trying to leap over a brook. He was thrown by his horse, who kicked him in the back and crushed him, causing serious internal injuries. He lived with very poor health for the rest of his life. In 1916, George's eldest son Percy was fatally wounded at the Battle of the Somme, and in 1929, George Herbert's wife, Violet, the Countess of Powis, died after a car crash in Northamptonshire. She was being driven by her chauffeur, but the car skidded and collided with another vehicle. She appeared to be free of physical injury, but she died from shock shortly afterwards. She was only 64. And then in 1943, his youngest son Mervyn, aged 38, was killed on active service in the RAF over Manningtree in Essex. His mosquito, it is thought, came under friendly fire from a Sterling bomber returning from a leaflet-dropping raid in Europe. The most famous ghost story at the castle dates back to 1780, when an elderly lady was employed at the castle as a live-in seamstress. She undertook her duties and was surprised to discover how much time the Earl and his family spent in London. But she worked hard and was liked by the servants, who decided to play a prank. She was overwhelmed when she saw the opulence of her living quarters, a luxurious room with a comfortable bed and a desk next to the fire, where she could read her beloved Welsh Bible. The room had acquired the nickname of the haunted room on account of the inexplicable noises and disturbances that had occurred there. The staff eagerly awaited the outcome of their spooky joke. Whilst she was reading by candlelight, she heard the bedroom door open. She turned to see a gentleman wearing a gold-laced suit and a hat. He walked towards the window and looked out, resting his elbows on the windowsill. Shortly after, he turned and left the room in total silence. Alarmed and suspicious that she had seen an apparition, she fell to her knees, begging God to protect her. As she prayed, the door opened again. Unable to speak with fear, the seamstress watched as the same man repeated the exact same movements to the window as before. Again, he left in silence. Praying for strength, the old lady vowed that if he returned, she would confront him. For a third time, the bedroom door opened, and once more the man entered. She bravely shouted, "Pray, sir, who are you, and what do you want?" The man looked at her, beckoned her to pick up a candle, and follow him. Shaking, the woman obliged, and he led her along a passageway and into a small room. He lifted a floorboard and pulled out a locked box with a metal handle. He then pointed to a crevice in the wall where a key was concealed. The man stared at her and whispered, "Both casket and key must be sent to the Earl in London. Do this, and I'll trouble the house no more." And with those words, he turned and left the room. The next day, she duly arranged for the box and key to be dispatched and returned to her sewing duties. The contents of the box were never revealed, but so delighted was the Earl, he rewarded her handsomely. He provided for the woman financially, with private accommodation, a pension, and some even say she had a maid. For the rest of her life, she lived in great comfort. The servant's spooky trick had definitely backfired, and the man in gold was never seen again. Ghostly mission accomplished. Built and opened in 1898, Mumbles Pier is located in the southwestern corner of Swansea Bay, near to the village of Mumbles. The 255-metre structure operates as a Victorian pleasure pier, but originally was planned to be a working pier. It was designed to alleviate congestion at the nearby Swansea docks, where imports of copper ore and exports of finished metal were being sent across the world. One lonely, ghostly figure appears here, and it seems her story is a sad one. Mumbles Pier was opened by Lady Jenkins on the 10th of May 1898. Crowds filled the area, and local children were given half day from school to celebrate this exciting occasion. It was commissioned as the terminus for the Swansea to Mumbles Railway and became popular with the numerous steelworkers and miners living in the area. Paddle steamer excursions, run by P&A Campbell, would travel from the pier to locations such as Ilfracombe, Lynmouth, Weston-super-Mare and Tenby. On the pier itself were a number of amusements, a bandstand and a skating rink. In 1916, a Royal National Lifeboat Institution walkway and slipway were added, and lifeboats are still launched from this location today. A lonely figure of a woman dressed in perhaps Victorian or Edwardian clothing has been witnessed on the pier late at night. A man named David Morgan reported his encounter in the early 2000s. He'd arrived to the pier around 1 a.m. to pick up his teenage daughter, who'd been attending a party at the pier's nightclub. It was a very cold November night. The sky had been incredibly clear, and David spent some time gazing up at the stars. After a while, he glanced across at the pier and saw a lady. She wore a long dress, and a shawl or scarf of some sort covered her head. She was walking away from David, who was stood near the locked entrance of the pier. Thinking it was strange to witness this sight, David watched as she walked to the very end of the pier, where she began to traverse the pier from left to right. She turned around and started to walk back towards the entrance, where David was still waiting for his daughter. Concerned for the woman's welfare, he continued to watch, but suddenly she began to simply fade away. She didn't pass the locked gates of the pier. He admitted that whilst he didn't know who or what he'd witnessed, he remembered it vividly afterwards. Nobody is sure who she is, but there is a recorded death on the pier from August 1907 that might link to the story. A lady named Mary Owen, aged 71, and who'd resided on the imbecile ward of the Swansea Workhouse for many years, was part of a group of inmates who were visiting Mumbles Pier for an annual picnic. Once on the pier, Mary sat down, and in just a few minutes she'd expired. The nurse accompanying the group called for Dr. Evans, but she was declared dead at the scene. An inquest was held at the workhouse, led by Mr. Viner Leader, the coroner for the borough. Mr. T. Morgan, the master of the workhouse, reported that Mary had been ailing recently and had reported being unwell the night before the picnic. The master declared that she had made a special effort to go to the outing and that she was really anxious to go. Perhaps the excitement of a trip out of the dark confines of the workhouse was too overwhelming for Mary. Does she return to the pier, a place she was so keen to visit that day, and where she took her final breath, surrounded by the beauty of the seaside? His Majesty's Prison Cardiff today is a Category B men's prison in Adamsdown, Cardiff, the capital city of Wales. It was built in 1827 and initially had capacity for 80 prisoners, including 20 debtors. The Victorian prison has been extended, particularly after the Prison Act of 1877, and today the prison holds roughly 800 prisoners. Despite holding male-only prisoners, the apparition roaming the wings of Cardiff Prison, surprisingly, is that of a female. An earlier jail was located on St Mary's Street in the city centre, and before that, prisoners were incarcerated within the Black Tower of Cardiff Castle. By 1814, the old jail was declared insufficient for coping with the scale of demand in this expanding industrial town. The last public hanging in Cardiff took place here in 1857, when 12,000 people watched John Lewis of Merthyr be hanged for the murder of his wife, who he had thrown down some stone steps when he was in a drunken stupor. His final words were, "I never touched her." The old jail was eventually demolished, and Cardiff Market stands on the site today. Between 1900 and 1952, 20 judicial executions took place in Cardiff Prison, and all were hanged for the crime of murder. Inside the Victorian wings of the prison, a female is occasionally heard sobbing uncontrollably. It starts rather quietly, but the sound travels along the wing, reaches a crescendo, and abruptly stops. Staff and inmates sometimes hear her, but never see her. An unpleasant odour of an unwashed body accompanies the cries of the spirit, nicknamed Molly. This apparition is thought to be Rhoda Willis, sometimes known as Leslie James, the last woman to be executed in a prison in Wales. In the summer of 1907, Rhoda Willis was drinking heavily and short of money. She'd been lodging with a couple in Cardiff and placed an advert in the newspaper offering to adopt a baby in exchange for money. A person responded. Willis looked after the baby for 6 weeks before leaving it at the Salvation Army with a note saying, "Dear Captain, do take my baby in. I am one of your girls gone wrong. I will come back if you will forgive me, and I will bring money." The baby was just about alive when abandoned on the steps, but died shortly after. Willis had also been contacted by Lydia English, whose sister Maud was expecting. Maud was living near Ystrad Mynach in the Rhymney Valley, roughly 12 miles north of the city of Cardiff. An arrangement was made that as soon as the baby arrived, Willis was to collect it, care for it, and for this she would be paid £6. On June the 3rd, Willis caught the train from Cardiff to the Rhymney Valley, collected the newborn and headed back towards Cardiff. On the train ride back, Willis began to consume alcohol. Not long into the journey, she had smothered the baby. The following day, Willis returned to her lodgings, drunk and fell out of bed. When her landlady entered the bedroom, she saw the dead body of the baby wrapped up in paper. The police arrived, and just 3 weeks later, Willis was on trial in Swansea. She denied murder, but evidence about the other baby at the Salvation Army was shown in court, and the term baby farmer was used. Despite her protests of innocence, claims that the baby was undernourished and died of ill health, she was found guilty of murder and sentenced to hang at Cardiff prison. It took a number of weeks for the execution to take place, and during this time, the matron of the prison, Miss Atkinson, spent time with Willis, who cried and sobbed in her cell. Public sympathy gripped the nation for a woman suffering from poverty, destitution and addiction. A desperate attempt to petition the Home Secretary, Herbert Gladstone, was launched, but ultimately was unsuccessful. On the 14th of August 1907, as the City Hall clock chimed 8 a.m, she was hanged inside the prison by Henry and Thomas Pierpoint. She weighed £148 and was 5'2", and her drop was calculated at 5'10". A crowd of 400 waited outside, and at 8:25, the warden posted the death notice on the prison gates. Shortly after this, events took a dramatic twist. It transpired that in the early hours of the morning of her execution, Willis made a sensational statement to her solicitor, Mr. Lloyd. He recounted, "She said, 'I wish to tell you that I could not go to my death with a clear conscience without telling you that I willfully killed the child. I killed it in the train between Llanishen and Cardiff. A sudden temptation came over me and I could not resist it. I particularly want those who tried me, especially the judge, to know that I was quite guilty, as I should not like to die with any possible chance of them thinking that I was innocent. It has been a great comfort to me to tell you this, and I can now die with a clear conscience." She was buried in the prison kitchen garden in an unmarked grave, neighbouring the bodies of the other executed men at the edge of the potato patch. The matron, dressed in black, laid flowers on her grave. Rhoda Willis was the only female prisoner to be hanged for murder at Cardiff Prison and the last woman to be hanged in Wales. Her protests of innocence, followed by her confession of deliberately murdering the baby, make her a controversial figure. Her tormented cries seem to ring through the prison, followed by a sudden silence, as though her life has been extinguished. I hope that you enjoyed hearing some stories from my homeland of Wales. As you might know from my Cardiff Castle video, I am from Cardiff originally, but I haven't lived in Wales for a very long time. I will create a video on Cardiff on its own, as there's quite a lot of places to cover there. And I've also got some stories of things that have happened to people that I know that are quite unique. Some of you might be wondering why I didn't include Llancaich Fawr Manor, which is in Nelson in South Wales, and that's because that will be an episode on its own. Weird things happen there, and I've had requests to cover this, and I will do that in time. Also, some of the castles in Wales, they could be an episode in their own right. I do have a couple of postcards for you today, but just before that, I would like to just share a few thoughts. I read that Aberconwy House was nearly dismantled and sent over to a buyer in America, but it was donated to the National Trust instead. And I was reminded of that time when the American oil giant, I think his name was P. McCullough, bought the old London Bridge in 1968, and he had it rebuilt at Lake Havasu in Arizona. And there were rumours that he believed that he'd bought the rather more impressive Tower Bridge, but P. McCullough always denied this. I was quite sad regarding Mary Owen in the workhouse in Swansea, and apparently she died of a weak heart. But I do think it was a good thing that she died outside of the workhouse itself. I found the workhouse's record of her death, and I was really pleased to see that she was listed as taken out by friends, so I think she had a proper burial, which is good. I wonder if she returns to the pier, as she didn't get a chance to really walk along it with her picnic companions. Maybe that's why she returns. I found another ghost story that I wanted to share with you, but I only found it after the video was made, so I'll try and illustrate it as best as I can. But I wanted to tell you about a pub in North Wales called the Llyndir Inn, and it's an old thatched pub that dates back to 1229, and apparently it's haunted by a woman named Sylvia. She was the wife of a sailor who was the landlord back in the 18th century, and she would get bored by her husband's long absences at sea, and she became unfaithful with various local lads. And her husband knew nothing of this until he arrived in the port early because of bad weather. And he came home and found her upstairs in the inn with one of the local chaps. And you know where this is going. He grabbed his dagger and attacked the young man, and then he strangled his wife and left her dead on the bed. This is where it gets a bit weird. So apparently Sylvia's ghost seems to be as amorous today as she was back then, and apparently if a man spends the night in the room where she died, she gets into bed with him. And lots of people have felt the bedclothes be pulled off in the night, which is creepy in itself. But the idea of her being able to get into bed with someone, especially if they don't know the story, must be terrifying. And in the early 2000s, the landlord, whose name was Alan, went abroad leaving his son and daughter to look after the inn, and they heard this piercing shriek that reverberated right through the property, and they had doors being blown open. And when the daughter returned to her room, she found all her makeup had been taken out of its bag and arranged in a perfect semicircle on the floor. And they were so alarmed they rang their dad and said, "What's going on?" And he basically said that he knew about this activity in the pub, but he didn't think that the spirits were harmful, they were just playful. I think this is quite an interesting story because we all know that ghost tourism is big business, but on their website there's absolutely no mention of this at all. No ghost nights, no paranormal investigations are mentioned, which is quite different to somewhere like Jamaica Inn, where they really promote that sort of stuff. So my question to you is this: would you stay at the Llyndir Inn? Or have you ever stayed in a pub or a hotel that's haunted? Let me know in the comments what you think. This first postcard is from 1928, and it was sent to somebody in Portsmouth. And it says, "My dear mother, a postcard from you this morning and a letter this evening. I feel rich. Today we have been to Conwy again. We love the place so, and we have been over the 2 old houses again. The house on this postcard was built in 1300. Weather is lovely. Lots of love, Lillian." And then in the corner it says, "I don't know if I have sent you this card before." What a nice postcard. This next postcard is from 1906, and I think if there was ever an award for most romantic postcard, this one is the winner. "Dear Margaret, received your kind letter Tuesday. I am enjoying myself at Mumbles today, but I would enjoy myself more so if you were with me. I have thought a lot of you lately, and would only be too glad to see you. I can assure you, my mind isn't contented at all. I will write to you again shortly. Excuse postcard. I am at Mumbles every week. Yours, A.W." Well, I wonder if they got married. I wonder if he might have passed away in the First World War, who knows. But definitely a very, very lovely postcard, I think. And that's all from me today. I really hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please give it a thumbs up and a like. And I will see you on the next video. And as we would say in Wales, hwyl fawr, which means goodbye.